I'm Andrea Miller. I'm the founding board member for Center for Common Ground. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our presentation on voting in troubled times. So we are starting our presentation right now. And tonight we have three very, very, very special guests who will talk about the moral imperative. In other words, why people of faith need to participate in this, what will obviously be very historic election. Now, a little bit about Center for Common Ground. We are a Virginia-based 501c3, and we have a very simple mission. Our mission is to empower underrepresented voters. We run two campaigns, the Reclaim Our Vote campaign, and this is normally where we meet every Thursday night, and then we run a bigger, broader campaign called Let Me Vote, Count My Vote. Additionally, we are a technology company. We invent technology to empower voters for elections. I would like to thank our partners tonight, State Voices, Black Voters Matter, UU The Vote, Mi Familia Vota, American Ethical Union, the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. They have been with us for just about most of the year. And I'd like to update you just a little on what we have done so far in 2020. Our voter outreach so far, we have made more than 400,000 phone calls. We have a huge active group of people who send postcards. We've sent more than 2.5 million postcards. We are probably this week closer to 3 million postcards. We have 10,000 volunteers. And as of today, this will be changing tomorrow. As of today, our focus is on 6 states: Texas, North Carolina, Arizona, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. And what we have done so far with this summit and new things that will be happening with the summit, on May 30th and 31st, we did our inaugural voting in time of COVID, the 2020 elections. Tonight, you are seeing the moral imperative. This series continues on August 13th, what voters will encounter in November, and we'll be focusing on Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina. On September 24th, we'll be talking about the shifting voter landscape, and October 22nd, the final dash. And what I want to also do tonight is send a very, very, very special welcome to our people who have joined our Watch and Act parties. This is the very first one that we have done, and we are so excited and so encouraged that, and we have even more now. This is when we made the slide what we had. We have Watch and Act parties in 81 cities in 23 states, including Washington, D.C. and Ontario, Canada. So that was my little introduction. So Gabby, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea, and good evening to all of you. Thanks again for those of you who joined us previously for joining us again tonight, and welcome to the newbies of our series. And of course, I also want to give a special shout out to Nancy Goodman and Suzanne Hutner for being such incredible organizers. We can't do these events without you. So I promise I'll be brief, but I do want to start us off tonight with a few thoughts. When we started to think about this and we decided to focus on the moral imperative, I have to be honest, I was struggling a bit to define what that meant to me on a personal level. And I answered it with a question, which is, why do democracy in the 2020 elections matter so much right now? And it boiled down to the very moral imperative that I was asking myself about. We are living in a moment of many moral failures, specifically moral failures in leadership. And why do I say that? Primarily because a number of circumstances have arisen since our last summit program just 6 weeks ago. To stand up in my mind specifically for how we have been failed as communities. And they're rather disparate issues. The first is the failure to create a mask-wearing culture and to take the virus seriously. And the other is the failure to address Russia placing bounties on the heads of US soldiers. And I guess for me, I mean, these are two huge issues. Why? One is about the public safety of the nation, and the other is about its national security. And where I really feel failed is that instead of addressing these two critical issues and really keeping the public engaged and understanding, I felt that the White House has deflected. They chose to do other things and deflect by doing, for example, elevating symbols of the Confederacy, the statues being torn down, etc. And then we got to yesterday, and we were made aware of an additional potential fail, one that is engendering a lot of worry in communities across the country. The administration has proposed to open schools again and require children to go back without an effective public safety plan in place. What are we doing here? We're leaving families in a bit of a lurch. And these decisions are taking place in the context of the latest COVID numbers, which are 3 million infected and over 130,000 dead that we know of. We still don't have enough PPE 6 months into the pandemic, and hospital ICUs are becoming full to capacity in many states, from the southeast to the southwest. And I'm thinking specifically Florida and Arizona, which appear to be in a horse race over which one is the global center of the pandemic, the global center, not the US center. So bottom line, protests against police violence aside, things continued on a very chaotic path over these last 6 weeks, which leads me to why I'm actually very pleased about this evening's discussion. Because I feel that tonight we have an opportunity to begin to put together some very important how-tos to address, I think, what are becoming harms to us internally as advocates. And I have a proposition I would like to make with you. A proposition that maybe some of you have thought about, maybe you haven't. But, you know, we're all worried about business going back to what it was, what the norm was before. And I propose that we not go back to business as usual. I propose that we take a deep breath, center ourselves, and think about what it would mean to create a new normal. One where we address the harms that we may have been inflicting on one another, often unthinkingly, and maybe have done so for generations. If the pandemic demonstrated anything, it's that we're all interdependent and issues are intersectional. We are connected. So tonight, our panel, led by Rabbi Michael Namath of the Religious Action Center and consisting of Nicole Presley, the national organizer for You to Vote, and Reverend Marvin Silver, the Associate Conference Minister for the Central Atlantic Conference United Church of Christ, they will guide us through some ideas about how we can all work together, secular and interfaith, how we can bridge divides to inspire social justice, how we can center ourselves as individuals and sing our own redemption song. And on that hopeful note, please welcome Rabbi Michael Namath. It's all yours, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with this great group of people and all of you joining us as well. There's a story told about a 20th century Israeli rabbi, the Chazon Ish, and on election day, the rabbi runs into one of his congregants and asks him, a fairly simple question. Have you voted yet? And the person responds, no. So the great rabbi asks, why not? And the individual responds, I don't have the 3 Israeli pounds to pay the poll tax. So the rabbi says, do you own a pair of tefillin? Of course, the person replies, well, you can go and sell your tefillin, this item that you use in daily prayer, and use those funds to pay the poll tax so that you can go and vote. And the rabbi explains that wearing tefillin is a mitzvah or a commandment, but voting in the election is also a mitzvah or a commandment. And the rabbi was not worried that this individual would not put on tefillin because they could borrow a pair. But he was worried that this person would not perform the other mitzvah, the other commandment of voting in the election. The rabbi knew that voting was so important that it superseded owning tefillin, which are used on a daily basis and very important for traditional Jews. But one can borrow tefillin. You can't borrow a vote. And if you don't vote, there's no making up for that opportunity. Elections impact day-to-day lives of everyone in society. Votes matter not only on the day of the election, but after every day, from day to day to day until the next election. So when I first heard this story, I asked myself, where does this idea come from within Jewish tradition that this rabbi would say voting is so important? And at first glance, when you look at Judaism, you see, especially in the Bible, it's a theocracy. There's not a democracy there. There's priests, monarchy. Democracy is a much more recent thing. So I wondered where in our text, where in tradition would I find this? And looking in the book of Deuteronomy, we read, be over yourselves, the king that God elects for you. And later in the book of Samuel, we read that God chose the first Saul, and then the second king, David, was chosen by God, confirmed by all of Israel's elders. And then we get to the third king, his son Solomon, who was, of course, a descendant of David's, but all the people together ratified his ascent. Given this shift, the rabbis of the Talmud shared that not even God could select rulers without consulting the people. So one of the rabbis in the Talmud writes, a ruler is not to be appointed unless the community is first consulted. And voting is our modern way of consulting the community before appointing a ruler. Now, the rabbis of the Talmud in the 4th century had no idea of a representative government and a representative democracy. They did not know of rulers who were elected, but they still highlighted the importance of the community having input into who them. And today, when we have the right to vote for our elected officials, we also have the responsibility to vote and also to ensure others in our community are able to vote as well. We live in the world as it is today, one that is broken with injustice, and we want to build the world as it should be, a world filled with wholeness, compassion, and justice. But how do we make that change? How do we go from where we are to where we want to be? By living our values, by urging our elected officials to put those values into action. But we know that elected officials listen to the people who elect them. Just look at the issues and they choose to take up and how they choose to act on them. And we see it time and time again, that those are the people that they listen to. So by making sure that the leaders we select represent the people, and if we want them to represent all the people, then we need to make a change and make sure that our electorate and the people who are going to vote are representative of the people who are in our country. And that's why we call our campaign, our civic engagement campaign, Kol Kolot, which means every voice, every vote. Because every voice must be heard in this election and every vote must be counted. In the United States, we have this incredible opportunity of the vote, but we know that not everyone can access it. And that's why 55 years ago, in the conference room of our Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism in Washington, D.C., the luminaries of the Civil Rights Movement drafted their contribution and sections of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was key to the work that we were doing at the Religious Action Center at that time with our partners across lines of difference. For all of us in the Reform movement, democracy and voting rights are as sacred as they are personal. And for the last 2 election cycles, with the leadership and support of our entire denomination, we've engaged in a nonpartisan civic engagement campaign. We've brought our deepest concerns and enduring Jewish values to bear in elections, challenging our nation to fulfill the democratic promise that it was created upon. Now, this election is going to determine the future for our country, for our dreamers, our immigrants and refugees. This election will impact the lives of women, LGBTQ individuals, and people of color. This election could declare our commitment to saving our planet, to lifting people out of poverty, to ending the plague of gun violence. This election could move us closer to a better sacred time when everyone can sit in safety under their own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make them afraid. When everyone can sit in their own home without fear, can walk in the streets of their neighborhood or any neighborhood without fear. That is the world that I want to live in. Another story. Once there was a wise woman and a mischievous boy. The boy was driven by a desire to expose the wise old woman as a fool. So the boy had a plan. He'd captured a small, fragile bird in the forest and put it in his hands. And he cupped his hands so you couldn't see the bird. And he approached the woman and asked her, "What do I have in my hands?" To which this wise old woman replied, "You have a bird." Then the boy asked, "Is the bird alive or is it dead?" Now, if the woman replied that the bird was dead, the boy would open his hand, allow the bird to fly off back into the forest. And if the woman replied the bird was alive, the boy would crush the bird with his hands until the bird died. And then the boy would open his hands and say, "See, the bird is dead." So how did this woman answer the question, is the bird alive or dead? She looked at the boy and replied, "The answer is in your hands. The future of our country is in our hands, and we must act to ensure that every voice is heard, that every vote matters and is counted in this election." It's my pleasure at this time to invite Nicole Presley, who is an organizer and communications strategist who blends the power of storytelling and community organizing to mobilize communities across difference. She believes that community is the foundation of both faith and politics. Who and how we are together is the deep relational work that changes lives and the world. Nicole is a member of Abundant Love UU congregation and is currently on leave from her position as the Director of Communications and Marketing at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta. She is currently working as the national organizer of the UU the Vote campaign at the Unitarian Universalist Association, and she is going to take it away next.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Michael. That was amazing. Kind of, as you said in my introduction, the power of storytelling is amazing. I really do think that is how we relate to one another and how we relate to our world. So really thank you for sharing those powerful stories. As Rabbi Michael said, I'm Nicole Presley, the national organizer for the You the Vote campaign, which is an electoral organizing initiative of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And I want to start by saying that, of course, right now we are in a deep and critical moral imperative, but that we are very acutely aware of this moral imperative now, but it has been here for decades. In our churches and in our politics, we have adopted individualism, we've we've adopted competition over the essential building blocks of a democracy, which is community and cooperation. In our most effective movements that have created deep change that we always go back to, they have all included multiracial mobilizations in communities, particularly the communities that are most deeply impacted, and centering them and centering those demands that create more equitable conditions. Unitarian Universalism, we affirm 7 principles as anchors to our faith. And among them, our first principle, which is the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and our 7th principle, which is the respect for the interdependent web of which we are all a part. And for me, those are the 2 anchors of this You the Vote campaign, because it really hits home about who matters and whose voices matter and get heard, and that nothing happens without the collective. Nothing happens without the consent of the community. So when we truly believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all, we begin to understand ourselves as members of a community. And we design systems, right? Systems based on our liberation and community thriving. Our current political reality, unfortunately, is really an expansion of a crisis that has already existed and has been moving through our communities for a long time, particularly low wealth, Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer, immigrant, undocumented communities, and the intersections thereof. Healthcare, food insecurity, unemployment, and of course, why we're here today, really the most salient issue, the complete ignoring and disregard of the will of the people. Have all been critical issues, and we've been just chipping and chipping away at it until it's become a crisis that has expanded and impacted more people. And that is the opportunity that we have before us in 2020. So what we're seeing is that fundamental to democracy really is agency and accountability. I think that's what we're all witnessing as we watch press conferences, as we look at the news and say, we have facts, we have people, we have people mobilizing, people making clear demands. We have a constitution, and no one that is in charge, right, is really listening and holding themselves accountable to the will of the people. Essentially, right, we are declaring that like people, right, and communities matter. And really acknowledging now as a large national community that the only ethical system to build around what I'm sure we all feel is a theological assertion is a democracy that centers justice. This is not just a political assertion, but it is deeply rooted, right, within our faiths and our theological traditions. Our church, right, the Unitarian Universalist faith doesn't just affirm the worth and dignity of people, but we build the systems and the governance models to make it so. Now we do so imperfectly, of course, but it is our essential organizing principle. It is that large goal that we continue to commit to and recommit ourselves to build a world where collective liberation can be a reality. Now, in the history of the United States and in our politics, we have struggled, right? We have deeply struggled to affirm, legislate, and organize around the inherent worth and dignity of all. This is how we get Black Lives Matter being a controversial statement. This is how we are okay with determining the quality of children's education based on income and zip codes. This is how we regulate bodies instead of guns. And this is how we truly get folks who die in their homes out of the fear of plunging their families into debt over their own health and mortality. And the sad fact is that was the case before COVID-19, right? Having a healthcare system totally dependent on if you have enough money to live is a deep, deep moral failing of the United States. But so instead, right, so for our faiths and our faith movements, instead of being prophetic, right, because we always have to be, if we're if we're demanding that our systems of government are accountable and transparent, we must be as well. So what I would have to say about the role of faith in this moment in the moral imperative is also to own our own history and place in this work. Because instead, for so long, for many of us, instead of being prophetic, we have decided to be pragmatic. We have accepted the terms of parties, candidates, institutions that tell us what is possible. But these institutions, right, these institutions, especially, of course, our government, get their power essentially from the community. And our faith communities have a charge to go beyond what is politically expedient. We hold radical political imaginations about what is right, what is righteous, and what is just. So when we commit ourselves to the teachings of our faith traditions, right, as Rabbi Michael was talking about, like, where do we find in our traditions, right, evidence of this being super critical, not only in 2020, but to the operation of a just and functioning society? We have to look at the teachings of our faith traditions, where we are compelled and moved to engage with community and really create a new world. And I think that's the goal, and that is the mandate, bringing these fundamental systems of ethics into the public square, and assert that our faith, of course, is not partisan, but our faith is political, right? It is what guides our choices and how we act in the world. And this electoral work right now, of course, is an essential battle. It is an essential battleground to create active and imaginary space where we can work for the agency of all people and the accountability of every single one of our systems. And what that requires, especially for folks with privilege. And I say this as a Unitarian Universalist who is representing an electoral justice campaign within a faith that is largely right and largely affluent. It means that we must listen, right? And we must follow the politics and the demands of those who suffer most under these systems of oppression, because they have the answers, right? They have the answers to their own liberation. As we do electoral work with our You the Vote campaign, we have intentionally decided to partner with organizations that are led by and accountable to frontline communities. We have committed to working to combat voter suppression. We've been doing that with partnering with Reclaim Our Vote, which has been wonderful. We just got done with our faith-wide conference a week or so ago, where we made 114,000 calls to voters in Texas. But we're also engaging in the difficult and essential conversations about anti-racism and anti-oppression. We're working with local and state partners to advance calls for decarceration through voter education around sheriff and district attorneys' races. And we are in solidarity with uprisings in the movement and are doing the work to divest from policing and other death-dealing systems that disproportionately affect Black and Brown communities. Because if collective liberation is the goal, then abolition has to be the word. And we are supporting folks in practical ways, whether that's making masks, distributing food as well, because we also know that keeping communities in crisis, which is what we have done for decades, is a strategy that disempowers and disenfranchises. So if we, as faith leaders, like faith leaders of the past, are going to keep our minds and our hearts, and yes, as well, our investments focused on collective liberation, then the political and moral work actually become one. And that is what we're seeing today, is that people are really, really inviting faith movements into the public square and yearning for an understanding of politics that centers the community over individualism, right? And over competition, because this pandemic, as terrible as it has been, has really focused us on knowing that we, in fact, do need each other to survive, whether that is a reflection on how the virus is transmitted, or the delicate balance of maintaining an economy, right? Um, who has to work, and what gets produced for us to literally survive and thrive. And so that is what I'm really, really excited about. We will do it, of course, imperfectly, but I do believe that if we focus our goals on collective liberation, then as we bring that voice into the public square and do the work of our faith, that liberal leaders must come out, right, and reclaim that space and build a new political movement that imagines a world outside of what we've been told is possible, and actually embody and create that world together. So those are my words. Thank you so much, Rabbi Michael.
Thank you. Appreciate those words. Want to also invite Reverend Marvin Silver, who serves as the Associate Conference Minister with the Central Atlantic Conference of the United Church of Christ. The conference as a whole encompasses more than 167 churches across the Mid-Atlantic region of the UCC, covering New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, DC, and parts of Virginia and West Virginia. Prior to joining the CIC, he served as pastor of Jubilee UCC in Lanheim, Maryland for 6 years, working in partnership with leaders and people to lay a strong foundation for a new church based upon a new identity and focus for ministry and mission. He has an unquestionable commitment to social justice and equality that has been demonstrated in leading and organizing social justice campaigns as policy advocate with Justice and Witness Ministries, as senior campaign manager and deputy legislative and policy director with USA Action, and as outreach director with Americans for Financial Reform. So we welcome Reverend Silver.
Rabbi Michael and Nicole, thank you for your words. They were powerful. Not sure if there's really much left for me to say, but I want to offer sort of the perspective from the United Church of Christ. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, to be a part of this conversation this evening. The work of the United Church of Christ, our Witness for Justice, is known in the faith community and in a lot of secular circles as well. But one of the things I'm appreciative about many of our leaders, and particularly our churches and pastors in the Central Atlantic Conference, is we don't like just sitting on our history. We want to make real our story today, and we want to do that in partnership with those individuals who are being impacted by injustices across communities in this country and across the communities where our local churches are serving. So we are excited that our national offices are continuing to move forward with Our Faith, Our Vote, Our Voice campaign. And in the Central Atlantic Conference, we have organized our manifestation of that campaign called Faith and Democracy 2020. The key thing about the work that we're doing across the United Church of Christ is that we believe that as people of faith, our relationship with God and the guidance of the gospel and our love for humanity really paves the way for liberation from all forms of hate and oppression. We believe that liberation is a choice, and that we must choose to embrace it, stand for it, and fight for it. And what better way to do that than an election year where our voice matters, but not just our voice, the people who are being impacted by these injustices. We still believe that the call to engage in public life and the fight for justice and liberation is still the same as it was yesterday. And we are fervent in reminding our leaders, our members across the church, that we are called to exercise what we believe as people of Jesus Christ out in the public square. We also recognize that the journey to rid our communities of injustice and equality has been long and has been filled with obstacles and opposition, yet there is no better time than now to be faithful to God's call, and that we believe that led by our faith, focused on freedom and liberation, and energized by love, that we can make a seismic shift towards justice and true democracy at this time in our nation's history. We recognize and embrace the reality that we cannot do this work alone, that we must do this work in partnership with the least of these, and also other like-minded organizations and leaders who believe in collective power and action. We don't take politics to be a dirty word in the United Church of Christ. Politics to us is simply a struggle for power. We think it's important for our pastors and our local churches to understand what power is, how to organize that power, and how to mobilize that power to bring about lasting change for those who need it the most. And that's what our election campaign this year is really all about. It's about making sure that not just people in the pews are exercising their democratic right to vote, but it's also making sure those individuals that our churches serve, either in the pantries or in other so many different ways through social services, that they also are also exercising their right to vote as well. But I know that we're talking about voting tonight, but the reality is, we're in a very important year in our nation's structure where the census is also happening. So we're adding the census as part of our election program as well too. That your voice is important in the political process, making sure that you have a say in who you want representing you, whether it be the local elections, whether it be a state election, whether it be a federal election. But also we want to make sure that your voice is heard in the census, because the census is not just about a count. It determines the political trajectory of most local communities across this country, as well as it determines how state and federal dollars are distributed and where business will choose to do business across the country. So we're lifting up the importance of voting and the importance of participating in the 2020 census. In the Central Atlantic Conference, one of the things that we are focusing on this year as part of our Faith and Democracy 2020 campaign is really trying to build a unified movement across the geographical boundaries that Rabbi Michael mentioned that make up the Central Atlantic Conference. Part of the reason why is because we recognize that our local churches can no longer stay in silos and do this work in isolation, that they must do this work with other UCC local churches. We must do this work ecumenically. We must do this work with our interfaith partners. We must do this work also with our secular partners, those in the civil rights community and those in labor. So we are encouraging them to connect up, hook up, and we're supporting them in developing these relationships on the ground, because we recognize that all politics is local, and the work that needs to happen around justice needs to happen at the local level from the bottom up in order for it to be impactful. So we're working tirelessly to make sure that our people understand the importance of doing this work from a theological and biblical grounding, rooted in a theology of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the biblical concept of justice and peace. We're also making sure that we embrace what I call the art of community organizing, building lasting power and organizing with and for the self-interest of the poor and oppressed toward a common vision of justice and community. We recognize that particularly our clergy have a role to play in this, this Faith and Democracy 2020 campaign. So we're embracing the importance of our prophetic witness and engaging in nonviolent direct action where possible. So I've been excited about how our pastors and churches stepped forward a couple of weeks ago around Juneteenth and stood out there outside of their houses of worship in their local communities, let their community know where they stand on the issues of racial injustices that have been happening across this country over the last couple of weeks and months, as well as to stand in solidarity and say we support Black lives and that Black lives matter. We're also recognizing that we need to be very strategic in how we do this work as well. So we're taking the time to really plan and do what's needed so that our work is impactful, and that it helps prepare us beyond the election, because although elections matter, we recognize that it doesn't just involve an election. What happens after the elections is just as important. So we see this as an important building moment to make sure that we're not just planning for this particular moment, but we're planning for the long haul and preparing for the long haul to make sure that we have those justice networks in those state jurisdictions in our conference to make sure that our leaders are ready when the state legislative sessions happen, so they can make sure that they are standing side by side with those who are most impacted by these issues, embracing their power, their voice, their agency to proclaim what they want to see changed and what they want for themselves and their families, and supporting them in that particular work. Our efforts, of course, just as Rabbi Michael and Nicole mentioned, are nonpartisan. We have to do it that way. We've been very intentional about making sure that our churches and pastors understand that this is a nonpartisan effort, that everything that you do must be nonpartisan. It must be about the issues, talk about the issues, often only the issues, and not about the candidates. Because that's what this is really all about. It's about the issues. It's about the issues that matter to people. It's about the issues that we have been struggling and fighting to see some change around for so many different years. And we believe that, yes, this is another election year. This is another historic moment. I don't know how many times I participated in an election year where someone always says this is a historic and defining moment. But yes, this is truly a historic and defining moment. It is true. And we want to make sure that we are part of that critical work moving forward. So our Faith and Democracy 2020 campaign is about voter registration. 2020 census is about voter education and empowerment, trying to make sure that we generate the positive attitudes in people's minds and spirits about going to vote, making sure that they have the education and the information that they need, both about the candidates, about the issues in their elections, and make sure that they have the critical information to know whether or not they're on the voter rolls, also as well as where to go and vote. If they choose to vote by mail, since we're experiencing this COVID-19 beyond a period in time in which we did not anticipate that we would, so people can make sure that they can access the ballot. But then also recognizing that we have to do as much as possible to get out the vote, because we recognize that not all jurisdictions are going to be what I would call helpful and supportive in making sure that people can vote safely. So we're going to do our best to make sure that people get to the polls and vote and protect them in that particular effort. And that's why our national offices have been a partner with the Election Protection Initiative for a number of years, since the 2000 election, when this initiative emerged across the civil rights community. So at the end of the day, I appreciate what Rabbi Michael has shared. I appreciate what Nicole has discussed. And I'm looking forward to engaging you in conversation about this important work and the importance of us doing this from a perspective of faith.
Thank you. Thank you both. This has been fantastic. And, I think we've started to uncover it, but where do we, would love to hear from you all, where do you think is really the unique role that a faith community can have in the conversation that, you just can't find from other communities, from other leaders? What is that special opportunity that exists for the faith community to play a role in conversations around the national dialogue, and in particular around voting?
Well, I think one way we can do that, Rabbi Michael, is we can provide a safe space. Now, although many of our houses of worship are not gathering in person, we still can provide that safe space virtually to have people from different political perspectives to come together and talk about the issues and why they are important. As trusted voices, hopefully most of the community see houses of worship and the faith community as a trusted voice. We can be there and talk about the importance of making sure that everyone engages in this process and making sure that everyone has as much information as possible about the issues as well as the candidates, and providing that opportunity and space for people to get access to the candidates, whether it be through organizing a candidate forum or an issues forum. And then even take that a little step further for some communities, for first-time voters in particular, this can be sort of a terrifying moment for them to go in. If you've never seen a voting machine before, if you don't know how to engage in that process, making sure that we do what's necessary to be in deep partnership with local boards of elections and bringing them to our communities to make sure that they educate the community about the voting machines, what the process is to register to vote, how do you make sure you access an absentee ballot. That's the role we can play in the midst of all of the back and forth between Democrats and Republicans and this particular candidate and this particular candidate. We could be the voice of reason. We could be the voice that gives people the information that they need to make an informed decision, an educated decision.
Nicole, did you want to add anything to that?
Absolutely. I think that Reverend Marvin really hit the nail on the head, as they say, about what we always talk about in kind of political organizing, right? Is like, who is a trusted messenger? of an idea, right? Because you listen to the person that you actually think, you know, has something to say about what's going on. And, you know, I won't get into reasons or how I personally feel about it, but I think that, you know, our leading parties are in fact no longer trusted messengers of a vision, right? Of even freedom, collective liberation, community, right? There's deep distrust. I don't care if it's like rich, poor, Black, white, documented, right? Undocumented. Everyone is saying the same thing, which is like this government, this system, right? No matter who is in fact in office, is really not structured to be representative or to listen to the people. And I think the one thing that faith-based institutions have, whether they practice what they preach or not, right? We are all, hopefully we're all endeavoring, right, to live into our principles and our values, is that our main concern, right, fundamentally has been community, right? And who we are as a people, right? Both as an individual spiritual journey, but also as a community, in a nation, but also in a global community. And so I think that there's actually, in fact, a deep yearning, right, to be one, connected in general. I think that's what, you know, we've witnessed with COVID-19, is that people literally, right, humans do not know how to do deep down this like individual solitary life, right? We actually yearn for deep connection, but want to be connected to community in a deep way where they can be transformed. And I think faith spaces allow for that individual transformation, but as well as that community transformation. And if we do in fact practice what we preach, right, and enter into relationship with other faiths, with folks that are not a part of a faith, that we actually become more trusted messengers and can persuade, right, and inspire. Because I feel like no matter what orientation, right, when we really dig deep, we want to make sure that all communities, right, can have power and a say, right? So we're not asking you to just agree with us. We're just saying, let's create systems, right, that are a little more honest, a little more transparent, and a little more just. And then let's do the work of like figuring out how things should be managed. But at the very as a very basic tenet is that voices matter. And we have systems where we silence people and we tell people that they don't matter and they don't count. That is, you know, has existed within literally the Constitution, right, of this country. So we, I feel like not only do we have, of course, a moral imperative to do this work, but that people are in fact yearning for that type of connection and for that type of dialogue. And I think it's really up to our faith institutions to be models and to be better, so that folks actually feel invited into our spaces and feel invited into that dialogue. And on that note, I actually think that we talk about, you know, oh, lots of folks are leaving the church and this and that, but there are actually many folks that are being welcomed in those particular spaces that decide they want to preach love and preach welcoming. So I do think that, you know, in many ways we are winning. The polls just haven't caught up yet.
Thank you. Love answers. I believe that you can direct chat Nancy, star Nancy Goodbane, and then she can get your questions, and she's sending the questions right to me. So if you can't chat everyone, you can definitely chat Nancy your questions. I love both of your answers, and I'm just going to add one piece to it, which is that I know for something that we thought about in the last cycle and we've been thinking about in this cycle is how do we take our rituals and connect them to voting and connect them to the work that we're doing. And so for us, for our members, we've been helping them with the postcards and sending them postcard kits. And in the kits, we've been including a blessing card, with the idea being that before you start writing the postcards, you actually offer a blessing and take what could be the mundane act of writing a postcard and elevate it to a higher spiritual level. And so I think that that's another opportunity that we have as well, is to take our traditions. And I know for us, we're often reinventing and recreating and connecting and making our traditions more real and relevant for us today, and how we do that with our voting and our helping other people to vote as well. So one of the questions was, I think, specifically about the story that I shared at the very beginning of what I said. Just to note, the story was really about the importance of voting, not about poll taxes. I do not encourage or want or think there should be. I've also heard the story told from different countries of the past. There's many versions of that stories going around in the Jewish community. So it's really about voting is so important. You would sell a ritual object that you're supposed to use every day in order to vote. A question about, and actually, Nicole, you started answering this about secular people and how to connect them in and how they can be involved. I don't know if Reverend Silver, you want to add to that, or Nicole, you wanted to add to that, either of you. I know you started to answer that.
I'll address that quickly. I think that, like, fundamentally, like, we are all spiritual beings, and within the Unitarian Universalist faith, we also have humanists, right, as a part of our faith. One of the kind of major anchors of our faith that I always talk about, because it's what really brought me in, is about covenant and relationship, right, and that is a sacred bond. Right, no matter what you in fact believe, we are all here living and breathing together, and that there is something sacred about sharing that space together. We also have 6 sources, one of which, right, we draw from Jewish traditions, we draw from Christianity, we draw from Islam, but we also draw from our lived experiences, right? And we understand that our lives and our experiences and journeys are also a source of embodied knowledge and truth. So what I will say to that is that I don't see the role of faith as necessarily dictating. No, I don't think any faith, when it's at its when it's at its best and most beautiful, is really an invitation to a path that is, yes, organized around and bound by a set of ethics that centers human thriving and worth and dignity. So people can find that in many places. I entered the Unitarian Universalist faith through activism, through literally being in a sit-in in Minneapolis in 2015. And feeling that connection and feeling that community support. And of course, there were faith leaders there that were preaching, and they weren't preaching necessarily scripture, but they were preaching stories, stories about how we navigate a world and find what is right and find what is just and apply ourselves in service to that. And I have not engaged in any faith tradition, in any relationships with other faith that were service and the recognition of human worth and dignity were not a part of their gospel. So I'm like, I think that's something we can all agree on. And I think that is what makes faith-based communities really attractive to people. Because the folks that are really engaged, we know that, like, there may be a doctrine, but folks are coming in at different stages, and in fact do believe many things, but right, are actually finding community still. There is this bar, there is this comfort that we keep coming back to. So for me, I don't actually see necessarily secular communities as outside of the work that we're doing.
Thank you, I love that. And there are many doors. There's not just one monolith of faith in our country, as you know, we just have a very small sliver on this screen tonight. I'm going to actually close us out with someone asked, what is the blessing? So I'm going to share the blessing, and then I'll hand it back to either Andrea or Gabby, who, when we met beforehand, said, you know, the panel time, it's going to go by very quickly, and it did. So our closing blessing. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, for giving us the opportunity to mend the world. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very, very much. Gabby, do you want to go through the upcoming summits?
So yes, happy to. We actually, I don't know that I have the list in front of me. I don't. I only have 3 slides in front of me. I think you're going to have to do it, Andrea. Oh, thank you. Perfect. So this is a summit series, and every 6 weeks or so, we're going to be hosting Next Steps. And our next one will be on August 13th. And it's about what voters will encounter in November in Texas, specifically focused on Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina. And those states are very important. They're also states we work in. And their primary process is, I'm not sure when everybody's primary was, but clearly these are states where we've seen a lot of voter suppression challenges. So it's something we really want to ensure that not only folks in those states know that we're here, all of us are here as a resource, and that we can help them get through a lot of it. In terms of whether they've been deregistered, they're come off the rolls, et cetera, and all the wonderful work that Reclaim Our Vote does and all our partners. Having said that, we're still working on our speakers. I think we're getting close to confirming them, which then takes us to our September session, the shifting voter landscape. And as we get closer to the election cycle itself, we feel that it's important for us to maybe look at some of the focus groups and surveys and polling, et cetera, to give us a sense of the more nitty-gritty of the voting piece and how people are feeling across the country about issues. Again, it always comes back to issues. If the candidates don't address our issues, they don't represent us, and therefore I think we should know about this and not vote for them. But that's, you know, that's how we are here. The other side of it, though, is then we get to the final dash, which is October 22nd, and this final dash, we're still thinking through what that's going to look like, and that'll be the last session, obviously, before November 3rd. And that last week, we are going to be focused on doing nothing but getting that vote out and ensuring that people know how to get to the polls. Andrea has all kinds of technology she can share with you regarding following where the poll sites are. Some places like to change their polling sites without telling you. So we want to make sure that if that happens, we're ready. We have all the information for you, and we can help you help us. So back to you, Andrea.
All right, thank you, Gabby. And what I'm going to add in is we've got really important phone banks that are up and running. Texas has a runoff primary, and we're very interested in that, in learning and looking to see what goes on in that election in COVID, and that's on July 14th. So everybody who registered for this, you will be getting an email that will give you information about how to participate and find out what activities we have available at Reclaim Our Vote. Gabby mentioned one of the things that we do is we track, we follow, we help voters find those very elusive voting centers. So Georgia, Texas, North Carolina all use voting centers. It's kind of like, where's Waldo? Last election, your voting center was here. Guess where we put it this election? We dare you to find it. So we build our technology that helps voters that are on the wrong side of the digital divide and all they've got is a landline, make a phone call and get the same information that people who are able to text and or are comfortable using computers have, but they may not even know where to find this information. So I want to thank our wonderful guest for being willing to join us, the team that works so hard on producing these summits, and to you, our very loyal volunteers and followers who really have helped Reclaim Our Vote, help voters in multiple states. And I'm going to pick up on something that Marvin said. 2020 for us here at Reclaim Our Vote is a milestone. It is the beginning of the empowerment of the communities that we've worked in to help turn out the vote. Everything that we learn, we will then be passing on and sharing with communities, including our technology, so that at the end of the day, if the people they elected are not supporting their issues and their needs, an election really is like the Greyhound bus. There is always another one coming along. At the next election, they can look at finding a candidate that really represents their issue. And there's a very good possibility that some of our local activists who we have trained and who are working so hard on the ground for these things will actually become the candidates now that they know how to elect people. That's so great. Thank you all for joining us and sharing tonight with us. And look for that email tomorrow. Now, we live stream this event to Facebook on People Demanding Action. We also have recorded this and we will be editing the video, and that video will be posted on our YouTube channel. So in the email, we will include the playlist, even though this video may not go up for a day or two, it's coming. So again, thank you all so very much. Rabbi Michael, thank you. Reverend Marvin, thank you so well. And Nicole, thank you for joining us. This was a wonderful evening.
Thank you. It's always a great time to hang out with the Reclaim Our Vote folks.
And go you the vote.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Go you the vote, exactly.
All right, yes. And go Rabbi Michael and the RAC for the incredible job you folks are doing texting Texas.
RAC is on fire in Texas.
Yes, they are. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Take care. Good night.